Good evening, and thank you very much for your patience this evening. Our star tonight has in fact been stuck in surgery in Sydney, performing an Osseointegration, but is here now and ready to go. My name is Ant McKenna. I was born on the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Victoria and live now on the lands of the Cubby Cubby people of the Sunshine Coast. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I have lived and here in Munjed, Brisbane, where we gather today. The location of State Library of Queensland on Kurilpa Point remains a significant meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people. So, welcome all of you to Munjed Al Muderis in conversation with Paul Barclay as part of the Talking Ideas series at State Library of Queensland. I work for BMAC, the Brisbane Multicultural Arts Centre. For 30 years, we've worked with refugees, new migrants, diverse communities, and multicultural communities to engage, build creative skills, to showcase and employ called creatives and creative workers across Queensland, including the wonderful Kachikamo that you saw downstairs tonight. BMAC is also part of Access Community Services, who support refugees and new migrants through housing, health, employment, and a number of other services. So, in Brisbane tonight, to celebrate the launch of his new memoir, Going Back, is Munjed Al Muderis. Paul Barclay is the producer and host of Big Ideas Radio National and is a Walkley Award-winning journalist with more than 20 years on your ABC. We'll be recording tonight, so please make sure your phones are turned off or on silent. If there's an incident, the fire stairs that you probably came up on, we'll go out there. The toilets are across the way. If you do need to exit before the end, make sure you go up the stairs and out the back door too, please. Now, join me in welcoming Munjed Al Muderis and Paul Barclay to the stage.
Thanks for coming along this evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Paul Barclay from Big Ideas on ABCRN, as you just heard. Our guest tonight, Munjed Al Muderis, has led an eventful life, to say the least. He was born to a well-off family in Iraq, where he grew up, largely unaffected by the brutality of Saddam Hussein's regime. He studied medicine, qualified as a doctor, and was working as a first-year resident in a Baghdad hospital when one day, in 1999, his life changed in an instant. In fear of his life, Munjed was forced to immediately leave Baghdad and in a fairly short space of time, after a rather perilous boat journey, found himself in Australia as a refugee in detention. Upon his release, about 10 months later, after being granted refugee status, he got a job in a hospital in regional Victoria, went on to specialise in orthopaedic surgery, and then pioneered a revolutionary new surgical technique that's improved the lives of hundreds of amputees by giving them new high-tech robotic prosthetic limbs. Now an Australian, a couple of years ago, Munjed returned to his country of birth to perform pro bono surgery and help to give hope to some of the thousands of Iraqis who lost limbs and were seriously injured during the decades of conflict in that country. He's now on something of a crusade, I gather. He's a surgeon, a refugee and a humanitarian whose work is lauded by princes, presidents and prime ministers. He has a remarkable story to tell. Please welcome Munjed Al Muderis. Welcome.
Thank you.
We are slightly late tonight because you were in surgery.
Oh, well, I'm terribly sorry. I don't know, I keep saying sorry because I'm always late. Actually, the other day I was giving a talk and I came, I think, 15 minutes late, and the speaker before me was talking about how we should be punctual and time. So I was like, I walked in and I looked at them and I said, hey, I'm a great example of that.
But the patient is well, I take it.
The patients are well.
Things were complicated in surgery today? Was that the problem?
No, it's just I was helping a colleague with a case, and unfortunately it took a bit longer than what he should.
So you fled Iraq in 1999 after a squad of Saddam's Republican guards stormed into your hospital with busloads of army deserters and draft dodgers, and you and the other doctors in the hospital were instructed to cut one ear off each man that was brought in. What an appalling prospect. Tell us what you did when you were asked to do that.
So Saddam Hussein was a crazy guy. I mean, he died now. He had this ideology that people who disobey him or people who do not follow the protocols that he set, they should be punished. But the punishment should be humane punishment. I don't know how you can match that, but he issued a bill, I think 150 in 1999. So people who were born in 1972, they have to call for conscription and for duty to the service. And the reason I know that because I'm born in that year, 1972. So I had to go and register myself. And if you do not call for the service, then they give you a month notice, and then if you pass the month, then they will come after you. So obviously a lot of these young men were found and then were captured, and the punishment was either imprisonment or chopping part of their hand or chopping their ear off. And that's what happened. They brought these soldiers to the hospital. We had the elective list. It was a routine day. All of a sudden, we were bombarded by 3 busloads of them, and they ordered us to abandon the elective list and start taking their ear off. The head of the department refused openly, and he said, "This is against the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm." And basically, they dragged him to the car park, and in front of everybody, they put a bullet in his head. And then they turned to the
You
rest
saw
of
this
us.
happen, or
I didn't see it because I was in the, but I heard about what happened.
word spread very
Yeah,
quickly?
very
Presumably.
quickly. And they came and they said, "Well, anyone share this man's view, come forward. Otherwise, proceed with our orders." So my life changed upside down. I was very comfortable in Iraq. I never wanted to leave the country. I was doing my job, and I had a family, I had friends, and everything was normal. And look, I mean, one thing I should say is that people who talk about Saddam Hussein, that he killed the Kurds or he killed the Shiites and he harmed certain groups of people, it's all a lot of bullshit. Okay, Saddam was the most fair person I've ever seen in my life. He just killed everybody. So he didn't discriminate against anyone. He killed his own son-in-laws, and he killed his cousin. So anyone who opposed him would face death. I faced the most challenging decision in my life. Should I obey the commands and live with guilt for the rest of my life? Should I refuse and end up with a bullet in my head, or should I run away? I managed to escape to the female toilets, and I had to hide in a cubicle for 5 hours, and then they felt like 5 years, and from there onward, I became a fugitive.
Did you see your life flash before your eyes at that moment in time and think, how am I going to, A, get out of the surgical ward, let alone, because you would have known at that point, by not following that instruction, your life was on the line?
Well, basically, if you refuse Saddam's regime's commands, you end up running away, because if you get found, you get killed. As simple as that. The price of a human life in that region is the price of the bullets that used to kill them. So it's as simple as that. And so unfortunately, that is the situation in many countries around the world at the moment.
So you're hiding in the female toilet for 5 hours and waiting for all the fuss to die down in the hospital, presumably. Talk us through what happens from that point in time to how you get out of Iraq and eventually onto a boat to Australia.
So I couldn't get to my car because my car's in the car park, and I thought that there would be a lot of guards over there, so I managed to sneak after 5 hours outside the hospital to a taxi rank, and I caught a taxi to a friend's place, and then from there onward, that friend took me to the outskirts of Baghdad and West, around 100 kilometers away, to a farm, and I had to hide there in that farm, and with the help of my family and my cousin, they managed to forge a passport for me and got me a large sum of money, and they managed to smuggle me across the borders to Jordan. Jordan back then was not safe. It was like the backyard of the Iraqi intelligence services. So the only place on earth that would basically take an Iraqi national with half-decent passport was Malaysia. Malaysia would give Iraqi nationals 14 days visa. And so I decided to take that flight, and it was a dark tunnel with no light at the end.
Did you know where you were going at that point?
No, of course not. I mean, I thought I would go to Malaysia and try to start from zero and find a way to survive. And everything was dark and gloomy. But then events happened that changed everything. In Abu Dhabi, we were in transit. I met two young men who they looked very rough, and they couldn't speak a word of English. And among you who have been to United Arab Emirates, nobody speaks Arabic, despite that it's called Arab Emirates. You either speak one of the subcontinent languages or English. So I managed to translate for them, and they found me useful. And I asked them the question, and I said, "Where are you guys going?" And they looked at me and suspiciously, and they said, "Well, we are tourists. We're going for holidays." And I said, "Yeah, you look touristy to me." So they said, "Okay, if you come with us and help us interpreting, then we would take you." And they had a small piece of paper with a number written on it, and we landed in KL, and we dialed that number, and that was my first introduction to a people smuggler.
Wow. And you then found your way to Indonesia, right?
So so that people smuggler, his name was Mahdi, he basically said to us, "Come and meet me in Chowket, where you buy fake Rolex watches and Louis Vuitton bags." And he said, "I will be wearing a hat, a brown shirt, brown short, and you'll find me in front of McDonald's." And I got out of the taxi with these two men, and there you go, Steve Irwin in front of me. He was blonde, blue-eyed.
Really?
And I started talking to him in English, actually, and he thought I'm fool. Anyway, he turned up to be an Iraqi Kurd, and he said, he took us aside, and within 5 minutes he said, "Okay, well, you're coming from Iraq, give me your passport and give me this amount of money," which was significant. He said, "I'll get you tomorrow with the next destination." So we did not know where we were going. We had no idea. So being an inquisitive person, I put my hand up and I said, "Well, can I ask you a question?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, how do you expect me to trust you? I met you 5 minutes ago." And he looked at me and he got really offended, and he said, "How dare you question my credibility? I'm a respectable smuggler." So anyway, he turned up to be respectable, I must admit. He came the next day with first-class ticket, Garuda Airlines.
Okay.
And he said, "Your next destination is Jakarta." He was very accurate. He said, "Don't go to the covered woman. Don't go to the guy with the beard. Don't go to the guy with too many stars. Go to the guy with 1 star. Give him your passport, but before you do that, put $100 inside the passport, and he will let you in." So I put my hand up and I said, "Are you expecting me to bribe a custom officer in a major international airport?" And he said, "Yes. Do you have an issue with that?" I said, "No, I thought I'd just check." And it went very smooth, and we ended up in Jakarta, an hour plus drive in the taxi to a rundown hotel. It was like a 6-story building. In the foyer there were tens of Middle Eastern looking people, and it was a very desperate situation where people that we saw have been there for months and months, not knowing where they're going, and they were completely lost. But then these two guys that accompanied me saved my life. They started telling people that this guy is a doctor, and I didn't realize that doctors are important until that moment.
Yeah, I bet. We have to kind of compress this story because there's so much detail involved in it, but suffice to say you do get on a boat to Australia and arrive in Christmas Island in Australia in late 1999 after spending 36 hours on a leaky boat with 150 other people. Less than 10 of them, I understand, were even conscious by the time that boat arrives in Australia. We hear stories about people getting on boats and arriving in Australia all of the time, the suggestion being that they're queue jumpers, illegal.
I was a queue jumper.
You're a queue jumper. You were allowed to jump the queue because, as you say, you were a doctor. Illegal entrants, they're also called.
That's wrong.
Yes, that's the Australian government seems to draw a line between those who arrive here by boat and those who arrive here by plane. That's something that you find a bit
Well, Australia is a signatory to
objectionable.
the Refugee Convention, Article 1951, and the United Nations Charter of Human Rights Declaration states that people can travel across borders if they are in fear of their life. And we are a signatory to that convention and this particular article. So it's not illegal to cross borders if there is risk on a human life. So the word saying that these people getting here illegally, that's completely rubbish.
What is it like travelling for 36 hours on a crappy boat from Indonesia to Australia?
Look, the boat journey was horrific, and what made it worse is that the skipper on the boat, as we got to international waters, he jumped on a dinghy back to a big grey ship with white numbers on it, and we were left to face the elements on our own. It was raining all the time. It was very rough seas. I was a hopeless doctor. I couldn't help anyone, and it was a leaky boat. It was like a small fishing boat, and we were 165 people crammed like sardines. If you ask me the question, would I do it again? You bet I would, because I had no other choice. And that's what people don't understand, is that these people that come on this boat, A, they are very well off because they have enormous amount of money to get on that boat, so they're not economic migrants. And B, they choose the boat because out of desperation, because there is no other choice. I could not see a UNHCR camp. I could not see any place to go to seek asylum. Mind you, the UNHCR camp system solve a problem of less than 1% of the international crisis. There are 65.5 million people who are displaced. 500,000 of them are in urgent need of placement, and they're dying every day. I was the lucky one, and I admit I was the lucky one to get on that boat. And factually, it is well-known fact that a person who is born in a UNHCR camp would die as an old person before get settlement. It's very likely. So it is a disaster.
It is a disaster, and if you were in the same situation now as you were then,
I would do it again.
But you would never get into Australia. That's according to the new rules, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we will talk about the offshore solution. People are not aware what our government is doing. I mean, forget about the humanity of things. Like, these people are crap, they don't deserve to come to Australia, fine. But we are spending $400,000 per head, per person, per year to process people on Narrow and Manus Island. Apart from being inhumane, this is very costly, it's not effective, and it's not going to last. And if we process people onshore, we would be spending less than $40,000 per head per year. So the amount of money that we spent on our offshore protection was more than $13.5 billion in the last 3 years. This amount of money, we can bring every single boat person, fly them first-class ticket to Sydney, take them to Hugo Boss or Zinnia in Pitt Street, and put them in a jacket, send them to Harvard University, get them PhD degrees, and bring them back professors, and we would be saving money. However, Mike Daly would argue with you that these bloody intelligent people, Chinese, are coming to take our jobs. So you can't win, no matter what you do.
Let's come back to that story a bit later on, because it's an interesting part of your story, and you have some strong views about it. But suffice to say, if we move forward a bit, you are granted refugee status in 2000. You're given residency in Australia, although that's
No, I was given temporary protection visa.
Okay. Maybe you should explain what happens then.
So I got 3 days late, where the John Howard and Philip Roddock changed the legislation, and refugees were no longer granted permanent residency. They were granted temporary protection visa. So when I was released, I didn't have the right to do anything. And funny enough, I had to work and find a job, and in order to do that, I had to apply for skill migration. So I had to fly outside on a weekend. I remember, I think I flew to Malaysia again, to KL, and process my application on Friday as a skill migrant, and fly back in to Sydney on a Sunday. I mean, what kind of stupid thing is that? And then I became a skilled migrant, so I'm no longer a refugee.
So you applied for a whole bunch of jobs in a whole bunch of hospitals around Australia, which meant that your medical qualifications from Iraq were recognised in Australia, and you could get a job in an Australian hospital.
Well, when I was in detention centre, I read my only book, Last Anatomy, and I had to go on hunger strike for them to give me the book, because it had the secret codes of escape of prison. But I managed to read that book, and because I was locked in a box, 1.5 metre by 2.5 metre for 40 days, I managed to read the book from cover to cover again and again. So when I was released, I passed my exam with high marks in anatomy, thanks to Philip Roddock, basically. And so I sat my qualification exam, and I passed it from the first go. And as a result of that, I recognised my qualification, and I was qualified to apply for jobs in Australia.
And you rather quickly decided then that you would specialise in orthopaedic surgery. Why was that?
Oh, look, that's another story. So when I first got released from the detention centre, I went knocking on every hospital door trying to find a job. So I went to Royal Perth Hospital day one after being released, because I was let go outside Curtin Detention Centre on the road to catch a bus. So I decided to travel from Derby to Broome to Perth to Adelaide to Melbourne to Sydney on a bus, and it was a fantastic journey. So I went to Royal Perth Hospital and knocked on the door, and I asked the receptionist to call the on-call doctor, and it turned up to be an Iraqi doctor, and he came and shook my hand, and he said, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I just got out of detention. Can you please find me a job? I'm a doctor. I want to work. And he laughed at me, and he said, go and pick some fruits from farms and study for English, and recognize, if you pass your English exam, then you sit for the medical test, and if you recognize your qualification, you might get a job. So go away. So I thought, this guy is a racist. He doesn't like me. So I decided to go somewhere else. I did it again and again and again, and I thought, well, Einstein says if you keep doing the same thing again and again and expect different results, that's the ultimate stupidity. So I went to this place called the Centrelink, and they taught me how to apply for a job properly. So I told this Iraqi guy that I want to do orthopaedics, and he looked at me and he really laughed this time, and he said, well, forget it. Orthopedic surgery is only for Anglo-Saxons and preferably Jews. And I looked at that and I said, what does that guy say? And anyway, so it's a very close shop, and it's only for the elites of the elites. And so I decided that I should do that. And,
nonetheless, you would have a go.
Yeah, so actually, we all, once things opened for us, I started working, I moved on with my life, and like everybody, and I didn't want to know anything about my past. And to be honest, I just wanted to forget everything. But then, everything. I talk about the Wheel of Fortune, and our position on the Wheel of Fortune changes based on the influences that affect us, and the main element that affects our position on the wheel is what you do for yourself. So my position was going up, and then I had this wake-up call in my welcome dinner for orthopedic training program, and that actually had a major impact on my life, where I was faced by two of my peers that got on the training program in the same year with me, and to my face, 50 centimeters away from me, they said to each other, isn't it a shame that the standards of the orthopedic training program in Australia dropped that low to allow Refugee to be one of us? And that was the turning moment in my life where I said, well, okay, well, number one, I'll show you guys what this Refugee can do. So I'll work my ass off twice as I do normally to prove to you that I can fit the boots of the job. And number two, I would dedicate significant amount of my life to act and educate people against these kind of behaviors. And there you go.
In a way, the story of your life as an orthopaedic surgeon, and we'll talk about pioneering osseointegration, the technique that you've now performed more operations than anybody else on in the world, I understand. We'll talk about that, but you feel, I certainly get this impression from reading your book, you feel that you've never really been fully accepted by that Anglo-Saxon hierarchy into the profession. Was that right to say?
Well, we live in Australia. With all due respect, tall poppy syndrome is a big deal here, and we need to get rid of this kind of mentality. And look, I travel. I was just telling you before. I travel all around the world, and I operate all around the world. And believe me, I was in America two days ago, and with all due respect, nothing against America, but the only good thing about America, in my opinion, is In-Out burgers, where they have very thick shake, and I love it. But there is one thing about Americans that made them a great nation, and that's when they see someone successful, they try to copy, and they try to follow. We don't have this kind of mentality. When we see someone rising up and becoming successful, the first thing we look at, this guy is dodgy, and we should take him down. Okay, and we need to get rid of this mentality. And
that was the situation with you. You were branded a maverick. I understand at one stage you were branded by one of your orthopaedic colleagues as a terrorist.
Well, yeah,
I don't know whether that was a joke or not.
I still am, actually. And there's one plastic surgeon hospital that I work at. He called me the boat person, like openly, and not in an endearment way, but and my response always is that, yeah, my boat is bigger than yours.
Yes, because you do have a rather lovely yacht. I've been reliably informed.
Having said that, I may correct one thing you said. I'm not a pioneer of this technology. I would never take the credit of pioneering this technology. The pioneer of this technology is Per Ingvar Brennemark, who invented the technology in 1965. And I'm sure among you guys, a lot of you would have tooth implants, and that was the pioneer of the technology.
Okay.
I can claim that I'm the Henry Ford that made this technology widely accessible by thousands of people, and by all rights, it was a very niche technology that was done 10, 15 a year, and when I came, it became in hundreds and hopefully in thousands in the coming couple of years.
Well, tell us how this form of surgery works, osseointegration. I understand that it's about titanium rods that get screwed into the actual bone, but I'm sure there's a more sophisticated way of describing that form of surgery.
Yeah, look, for centuries, there was a pioneer in 1529. His name is Ambroise Paré. He's a naval surgeon in the French Navy. He was the first person who pioneered rehabilitation of amputees. So when people used to lose a limb, they die. because majority of them end up with sepsis and they end up dead. But he created techniques of ligatures and mending their wounds, and then they started surviving, so he decided that we need to mobilize these people. So he created the socket-mounted prosthesis, which is like a bucket, like Captain Hook feathers, and with a broomstick attached to it, and that was a pioneer technology. And then from there onward, for 6 centuries, we've been doing the same. What we do now is completely revolutionary, where instead of mounting a socket around the limb, we insert a high tensile strength titanium implant into the residual bone, and we reorganize the muscles and the nerve around it to operate a myoelectric prosthesis. In arms, these myoelectric prostheses are mind control. So when a person thinks about moving his fingers, the fingers move because we hook up these nerves to the robot. And we are working on new technology where we attaching sensory things on tip of the fingers so they can feel, and they can feel the pressure or the touch. And this will happen, so we will create the RoboCop or the Terminator, basically, eventually. So that's what it's about. It's kind of cool, and I quite like it, actually.
Yeah.
I've done 2 today.
You mentioned the Terminator, James Cameron's famous movie, The Terminator, which I'm sure many of the audience have seen. This was actually something that stuck in your mind from an early age that has led you down this path, I understand.
1984, I was 12, and my English was not that good, and ironically, the whole idea about the Terminator movie is not to make Terminators. I was fascinated and I wanted to make a Terminator, basically.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And you are, kind of, not exactly. And I understand that amputees who have these new prosthetic limbs attached via your surgery, one of the things they particularly like about it is that when they put their foot down on the ground, they can feel the foot making contact, the artificial foot making contact with the ground. This is a major advance over old school prosthetics, right?
That's very correct. I mean, I was today showing one of the most respected surgeons in Australia, Dr. Zsolt Baloga, and he's from Hungary, and he's the most published guy in the whole country. And he came to see this technology, and he did a couple of surgeries with me. And when the patient wake up, and we could tap on the end of the prosthesis, and the patient says, "Yeah, I can feel it in my spine."
That's amazing, isn't
it's
it?
an instant osseoperception, and it's not just the sensory feedback they get. What's important? It's the feel of security and stability, because when for people that lose limbs, when they wear a socket-mounted prosthesis, they can't walk into dark room. They can't walk with confidence without looking at the ground, because they like walking on a hover mat. While with this technology, there is a direct feedback coming from the ground, so they can feel carpet, they can feel solid ground, they can feel sand or grass, and there is no excuse for anyone to step on their partner's toe anymore.
How quick is the recovery period after an operation, and how complicated is the rehabilitation that they need to go through?
Look, it's a multidisciplinary approach where we have psychologists, pain specialists, physicians, physiotherapists, all sorts of people that work with me. I'm a small link in the big chain, and the process is very, very extensive. But we managed to get this surgery in one operation. People get it, and they start. It's 3 phases where they start loading over a period of a week or 2, and then they get fitted with a trial leg to learn how to balance and walk with crutches, and then after that we fit them with a robotic leg, and by 2-3 weeks they will be walking with 2 crutches, and then for 6 weeks they walk with 1 crutches, and then after that they walk unaided. So between 6 weeks and 3 months is not dissimilar to a hip or a knee replacement, basically. We're trying to make it as simple as possible, basically.
you've done over 600 of these operations in Australia, another 200 or so pro bono operations in Iraq. Not anywhere.
Not just in Iraq.
Not just in Iraq, in
so
Cambodia.
we have
true. Yeah.
2 pilot studies. We do 2 kind of work. And please listen carefully, because a lot of people don't get that one, okay? So there is a lot of work that we do in developing countries, such as Cambodia, Lebanon, Iraq, United States of America, and we do a lot of work as well in developed countries such as the UK, Germany, Holland, and other advanced countries.
So it's becoming more common in Australia, this type of operation, because I got the impression from what you were saying before that orthopaedics is a rather conservative speciality. Is that holding back the development of this new form of orthopaedic surgery?
Well, it depends on which country you're talking about.
What about Australia? If we talk about Australia.
In Australia, we faced a lot of resistance to start with, as you correctly said. When I did the first 10, I presented them in the Australian Orthopaedic Association meeting, and after I finished my talk, I had 2 of my bosses come to me. They shook my hand, and one of them said, "I knew you weird, and you would always do something different, but good on you. That's how the medicine develops, and keep going."
Yeah.
The other one, which was exactly beside him, he looked at me and he said, "I'm sure Long Bay Jail still have a cell empty for you, and I'll make sure that I'll send you flowers." And
what were they objecting to exactly?
look, it's different. Anyone that does something different, thinking outside the box, it's pushing the envelope. Look, we are taking a risk. It is a risk, but it's a calculated risk. And if we don't move on with technology, we would be still, riding horses till now. We would never fly a plane. Isn't it a crazy idea to put wings and fly on a plane? You will crash and die. But someone had to do it. Same thing. It's a crazy idea to get on into the space. That is a risk. But the best way of doing it is by surrounding yourself with people with knowledge and experience in the field that you're dealing with. Educate yourself as much as possible, read as much as possible, and have proper informed consent from people who want to go undergo this kind of procedure. My first patient was from Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Brendan Burkett, and he's the greatest example of a patient. He's a professor of biomedical engineering, so he's the ideal patient. And I've operated on him in 2009, and he's doing extremely well.
He walks 2 to 3 kilometres a day along the beach, I think I read.
Well, more than that.
More than
definitely. Definitely, he's a Paralympian, and he's a pioneer in his own right in many aspects, and he's doing very well to date. And he was very well consented, and he read about it all along, and he said, "Look, I want to do it."
And you've always done pro bono surgery as well. What is it about offering your services to those who otherwise couldn't afford it that's important to you?
Yeah, look, money is not everything, and let's be clear. Orthopedic surgery, we earn a lot of money, and I'm not going to be Donald Trump, and I don't want to be Donald Trump, to be honest. And if you earn decent living, and I'm not saying that I'm a saint, but I always say to people, if you can afford it, then pay. If you can't afford it, I'll do it for free. But money should never be the obstacle for people getting it. And that's an honest response that I get to every patient, basically.
So,
and funny enough, okay, the vast majority of people are very decent, okay, and they would say, because when I say to them, if you have money, you pay. If you don't, and a lot of people say, no, I'll pay something.
Yeah. I think we're getting the impression that you're a unusual doctor. And
really? Took you all that time?
One of the things I understand that makes you unusual is that you become close friends with the people that you operate on, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, and I get criticized a lot about that because I don't treat my patients as patients. I treat them as human beings. I treat them as friends. And to be honest, we put these barriers between us and people that we deal with and patients, obviously for a reason. But my job is a humanitarian job, whether I'm treating a patient or whether I'm dealing with someone that need help in any way or form outside medicine. I mean, before being a doctor, I'm a human being, and we should always remember that. And patients, regardless of the excellent work that you give them, if you don't treat them as a human being, if you don't treat them with respect, and if you don't care about them, your work will be worth nothing. And I think our patients deserve to be treated as humans and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And we should never forget that. And that's why, I mean, look, I'm very odd, and to be honest, I don't give a shit if I get deregistered, because I treat patients as friends.
There cannot be that many people who flee a country because they fear for their life, and then a number of years later voluntarily return back to that country to operate on the victims of the conflict that, in a sense, you had to flee from. How much trepidation did you have going back to Iraq? And perhaps you can explain the circumstances under which you were invited back into Iraq to perform your surgery.
Look, I remember this vividly. It was in Cafe Sydney. I was driving in Sydney going to a restaurant, and I received this phone call, and at the other end was someone speaking Arabic. He said, "Are you Dr. Munjed?" And I said, "Yes." "Who is it?" And he said, "Are you Dr. Munjed?" And I said, "Yes, I am Dr. Munjed. Who is it?" And he said, "I'm the Iraqi ambassador in Switzerland. I need to speak to you. I was the Iraqi ambassador in Sydney." And I said, "Okay, what can I do for you?" And he said, "Oh, well, the Prime Minister want to speak to you, and I have your number." So
this is the Prime Minister of Iraq wants
Prime
to
Minister
speak to
of
you.
Iraq, yeah. Not who's our Prime Minister?
Yeah,
now?
that's it is hard to keep up, isn't it?
Yeah. So, is it Tony Abbott still? Or
No. We've had a couple since then.
Yeah. So anyway, I received that phone call, and it was from the Prime Minister's office, and then I ended up speaking to the Prime Minister, and he said, "I want you to come back because we have a lot of injured soldiers and victims of the war and fighting ISIS, and would you mind coming back?" And I said, "Yeah, I would love to." I came in 2008, and I offered you, like it was in a convention in Dubai, where I offered my work pro bono, and I got rejected. And finally, someone suggested it, so I said, "Yeah, I would love to come." And then straight away, I told my team, and these two ladies came with me voluntarily, and I said, "You're crazy because I don't know what I'm gonna face." And we got on the plane, and as the plane was landing, I was looking through the window, and it was dark, and Baghdad looked like a Christmas tree from the window, and I thought, "Holy shit! What am I doing to myself here? I'm going back to this place I left in the shade of darkness, and now I'm facing the unknown." It was a very uncomfortable feeling. I was more worried about these two girls than myself because, you know, I'm a risk taker, and if I die, you die only once anyway. But all my fears dissipated as soon as the door opened, and I was received like royalty, to be honest, and there were these people in suits, and they're wearing the emblem of the Prime Minister, and regardless of that, you could see the kindness in these people, and they're seriously happy to see someone trying to come and help, regardless of who it is, as long as someone that's trying to help these people.
But you're going back to your home country, your country of birth, the place you grew up in, the place you have great memories of. We haven't spoken about this, but you had a wonderful childhood growing up in Iraq.
And that's a very sad story, because we got out of the green zone, and it breaks my heart. And I don't want to go out of the green zone anymore, to be honest, because Baghdad that I left 20 years ago, it's still the same Baghdad that I returned back to, except that it's aged 20 years. And there's no single brick that laid in this city since I left. There are more than $8 trillion vanished in thin air, and massive destruction. Infrastructure is all what Saddam did, and it's very sad, and it's a shame that what we did to that country hasn't helped at all. And
was it a weird feeling being back in?
It was absolutely weird, and people, you can see. I mean, there is a glimpse of hope, because people still crack jokes and still laugh and still, are happy. But I didn't see a single person, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their affiliation or background, that is happy about what's going on in Iraq. Okay, Sunni, Shiites, Christians, they all said, well, we regret the times that we could, go outside and feel safe. So Iraq lost safety, and that's for sure is gone. And people now, they fight with each other in the name of God and in the name of the tribe and in the name of ethnicity, which wasn't the case, because back then they were all Iraqis, and they were all, loyal to the flag.
We should say that you come from a Sunni family with heritage, I understand, that goes right back to the Prophet Muhammad.
Correct.
But you are an atheist yourself.
Well, I still haven't found my faith yet. I'm still looking. But one thing for sure, I would not follow a religion that is violent and advocate for violence. And that's what I disagree with totally. But I mean, there must be something out there. And I respect all religions, and I respect all faiths. And faith is very important, because it gives people power and give people sense of belonging, but as long as it's not abused and it's not imposed on others, and that's what I totally disagree with.
Did going back to Iraq make you feel Iraqi, or are you Australian now?
I'm a dinky die Aussie. Okay. So look, with all due respect to Iraq, and with all due respect to the place that I was born in, home is the place that give you safety. Home is the place that feed you and protect you, and make sure that your kids can sleep and wake up the next day safe. That's home.
Yeah.
Okay? So Australia's home, Sydney's home.
You perform some amazing work when you're in Iraq. I'm sure that was the case in Cambodia and the other developing nations around the world where you work. On the first day that you arrive in hospital in Iraq, I think you see something like 90 patients in a day. The hospitals are just overflowing with people who hear that you've arrived. They've come from all over Iraq. I mean, what an overwhelming and incredible sensation that must have been.
Well, look, it was more chaotic than anything, and actually the corridors were full, and now we've been there 6 times. I'm going to Baghdad in 2 weeks, and during Easter, and I mean, I don't know how they heard about my arrival, but it was a good thing, because it gave people hope, and I remember very well. I met the head of the Hajj, and the Hajj is the paramilitary group which are loyalists to Iran or accused to be loyalists to Iran, and I don't care their affiliation and faction. All what I care about, what I've seen about these people, they care about their people, and they were the most organized. And this guy is officially a terrorist, basically. He's on the terrorist list of the Americans. But he's a wise guy. I sat with him and he said to me, "We don't care about how many people you treat. What we care about is that your presence, okay, gave people hope, okay? And that has a massive effect among the population. Whether you treat one person or 10 people, it doesn't make a difference, because we have hundreds of thousands of ill people. But when they see that someone is coming to help them, they would have some hope, and that matters for us.
You did a lot of operations on military and paramilitary people injured throughout the conflict. You did have to fight quite hard, though, to perform procedures on civilians, didn't you?
I still fight. I mean, I remember very well the story of Amani. She's a young girl who lost her legs above the knee, and I think it was on TV in Four Corners or one of the shows. At the age of 9, she had a severe kerosene burn as a result of a blast injury outside her house, and she's a poor young girl who's a civilian who doesn't belong to any faction or tribe or she's not military, she's not paramilitary, and she's unknown. She's no one. She's a true no one. And you can't imagine the struggle that we have to A, see her, B, accept the hospital to admit her and allow us to operate on her, and then fund her operation and her prosthesis. And I ended up, donating the prosthetics for her, and then we put the implants, and then we were fighting the government trying to put the legs for her, and nobody cares. And then ended up a generous my prosthetist and from APC, and they were very kind to donate 2 sea legs for her, and I took them to her, and now she's walking.
It's fantastic.
But it was a massive struggle, because every single person we treated, either military, like defense or police, or paramilitary, or expatriation from the Ministry of Health, and they all, have someone to back them. But this girl, and there are hundreds of thousands similar to her in her situation, that had no one.
Yeah, we should say that in the book there are so many individual cases that Munjed describes of individuals that he's operated on. We can't talk about them tonight, but some of them just really leave you with tears in your eyes. Hearing their stories are incredibly moving, and the ability to give hope to these lives as a result of your surgery really is quite incredible. You donate your time pro bono, but then of course there are the prosthetic limbs themselves, which can be quite expensive, and some money in Iraq is meant to be set aside for the purchase of those limbs. You've come up against some rather distasteful corruption and misappropriation of funds, it would seem.
There is corruption everywhere, and unfortunately I discovered that people pay $60 to come and see me, okay, to someone somewhere, and it's amazing. And now people are making money out of so it's amazing how people can make business. So the Prime Minister allocated $3.5 million to fund 48 people to fit them up with legs, and these people, we operated on them a year ago basically, and still haven't got the money yet, and haven't got the fitting, and the money is sitting somewhere in the cloud between the Ministry of Health and the Prime Minister's office, and every time I speak to people, I don't know who to contact, and now I receive phone calls every day for people saying, "Oh, we'll get the money, but give us commission, 15% or 20%." And I say, "This is not my money. It's nobody's money. It's these people that we fit them you guys get the money and buy them legs. Eventually was one incident where there was this guy Maliki. He's the previous Prime Minister of Iraq. He was in the hospital on the scene, and I managed to get him, and I'm crazy, so I stood in front of him, and it was like a mosh pit, and he reluctantly shook my hand, and I said, "We have a problem." And he said, "What's the problem?" And I said, "Well, I have these 48 people that I operated on for almost a year now, and they can't be fitted, and there is a money allocated for them, and nobody knows where the money is." And his response, so cold-blooded, he said, "Well, this is not my problem." And I said, "How dare you say this is not your problem? Of course it's your problem. These people lost their legs fighting for you." And you should see what happened afterward. Patients started jumping on him. They wanted to eat him, actually. And so he was ushered by his bodyguards and escaped. And the word does spread very quickly. Within hours, the current back then, the Prime Minister sent me a message. He said, "What the hell have you done?" Okay, and the paramilitary and the head of the paramilitary came to me and he said, "You know that he's my best friend?" And I said, "Well, I don't care, whether he's your best friend or not. It's what he said is completely wrong because he is responsible for these people, and he was the vice president."
Must be incredibly frustrating. I can imagine working under those circumstances. Are the operations that you perform in Iraq, because of the nature of the patients, victims of improvised explosive devices and victims of war, basically, are they more complicated operations? I imagine they would be much more complicated than amputee operations in Australia.
Look, I mean, we deal with very complex surgeries all around the world, but I must admit the complexity of the Iraqi cases are way beyond imagination. And I always say to my registrars and fellows that no matter what you do, don't show facial expression when you see something that's really horrific. And I couldn't help myself because I look at these X-rays and say, what the hell am I going to do with this? But the main reason I work in Iraq is that I can function very well in that country. I know the culture, I know the place, and Iraq has good infrastructure. Okay, so when
even the hospitals are okay?
They're not bad, actually. They do have money. Iraq is a rich country, and that's the thing. It's very corrupt, extremely corrupt. But if you know how to deal with these people, you can get them to do things, and some of them do care. Like it's completely different to working in Cambodia or Papua New Guinea or other places, because in Cambodia I had to bring everything with me. I still take a lot of equipment with me, and thanks to some airlines, actually, they gave me 5 kilos discount the other day, and normally we have over 100 kilo excess baggage, and remind me, we should never fly Qatar again. But anyway, there's nothing better than Qantas, I must admit.
There are many people who are very grateful for your work, Munjed. You've met Prince Harry, is one, but I was particularly interested in your meeting with the Grand Ayatollah in Iraq. He wanted to discuss your humanitarian work, and before you even spoke to him, he said, "Look, I need to tell you that I'm an infidel. I'm a non-believer." How does one go about telling the Ayatollah that you're an infidel?
Well, he's.
And how did he respond to that?
He is a very wise man, and so he's a very frail guy. And now I had the honor of meeting him, and I think he's a very wise person, and a lot can be said that to his credit, Iraq is still holding itself together because of his wisdom, and I know that a lot of people will come behind my back and say, "Oh, well, he sat in your place and he pretended to show respect, but he's non-believer." So I thought it's better coming from my mouth than from someone else's. But he went silent because he was praying for me, and I said, well, I just need to be clear about this, and he went quiet for a couple of seconds, and he said, well, my son, if we're not brothers in religion, we are brothers in humanity. And I said, well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said, and not a sentiment I think that we fully appreciate. I think in Australia we tend to see the Middle East as this part of the world of fundamentalist Islam, but you tell a story like that and it gives us an entirely different impression of religious leaders.
Well, look, I flew from Tel Aviv to Baghdad and through Jordan, and when I got there, and I took with me one of my fellows back then, and he's an Israeli citizen. And funny, the Iraqi intelligent people, because all the guys that look after us, he didn't come on the same flight as I did, and he got to the airport after me, and he was telling me the story that in the armored vehicle they asked him the story, and they said, so you're Israeli? And he said yes, and they said, so you're Jewish? And he said yes. What are you going to do to me? And they said, no, we just want to check if you have any dietary restrictions so we can so he had some bowel issues for a few seconds, but I'm in a mission, and I always kind of push the boundaries. So I have a tourniquet that I use, which is very effective, and this tourniquet is made in Israel, and I call it the Israeli tourniquet. It has a name, but I call it the Israeli tourniquet for a reason. So in Iraq, every patient I treat, I tell him that I'm going to use an Israeli tourniquet on you. Do you object? And there was one patient that said, no, I don't want it, and he bled, and I woke him up and I said, see, you nearly died. And but it's very important that we mend the gap between nations in the Middle East, because it's so ridiculous. These people have been living together for 7,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and they are cousins.
Yeah.
And it's only fundamentalists that cause this kind of divisions. Common people don't give a shit, to be honest.
I mean, Munjed, we're talking to one another. 20 years ago, you were sitting, or about 20 years ago, you were sitting in a refugee detention facility in Curtin in Western Australia. I mean, we've got to hear your story, the incredible achievements that you've managed to pull off in your life, how you're giving back to countries where people don't have the financial resources. When you were detained, of the over 1,200 people in detention, 13 of them were doctors. They've all subsequently gained specialisation. They're working in Australia. They're also giving back. It strikes me that we don't talk about these refugee success stories very much in Australia. The narrative is a different narrative. Do we need to start talking more about what people who come here from the most difficult of circumstances can give back to this nation?
Well, there are two arguments here, because there are a group of people who are insecure and afraid that these people that are coming here either are going to live on the social security and rip off the taxpayers' money, or become very smart and take our jobs. So that's one narrative. And that's easier to deal with, because number one, if we bring these people or people that come, and please be mindful that Australia is 25 million, okay? At the moment, we are 7 or 8 billion people living on this globe. In 30 years, we will be 15 billion, okay? And if we keep Australia 25 million, imagine how can we defend this country when there are people crowded outside trying to get in. So we need to be careful. We need to think about the future of this country. And even if these people that are coming to our shores, in the peak of the boat arrivals, there were 28,000 of them. You need to remember, the statistics says that at the same time, Australia received 28,000 boat arrivals, there were 62,000 overstay visas. Most of them are British nationals, okay? And at the same time, Germany had 1.3 million refugees. Same as Sweden had more than 200,000 refugees, okay? It is a problem. People do not want to leave their countries if they feel comfortable. I've been in Syria in 1996, and I didn't see a single Syrian that would want to go to London or New York or Sydney. They were happy with their country. I was happy to live in Baghdad, and I didn't want to leave, but I had to. Funny enough, a lot of the time we are creating the problem in these countries and destabilizing these countries, and we blame these people of coming to our shores. I mean, we need to think twice. So this one narrative that talking about these people that are either living on our social security, these refugees, we are trying to set them for failure because we are creating ghettos in crowded cities like Liverpool, Fairfield and Sydney, okay? We set these people to fail. And instead, we can ask them to live in Armadale, Shepparton, these places that showed a great deal of success. Mackay is empty now because of the mining industry. And even if these people don't work and bludge around, they still have to go to the barber to cut their hair. They still have to go to Woolies to buy food. And that will generate income for Australians, okay? So you just need to think in a different way. And if they become bloody intelligent and PhD holders and take our jobs, then that again should be a motive for us to work harder and become smart and compete with them. So that is an easy problem. The serious problem that we should fight is the rise of extremism. I was talking to my neighbor, and I said to him, there is no place for Nazis in Australia. And he said, no, don't say that. They're not Nazis. They are white supremacists. So I decided that I would dedicate 5 hours of research. And I tried to find a single difference between the two. And I couldn't.
How did you feel? I mean, you must have shared the repulsion that we all felt of the events in Christchurch recently.
Well, look, every time it stuck in my mind the picture of this 3-year-old little kid. I mean, what crime did he commit to deserve that? At the same time that this happened in Christchurch, there were 40 innocent Christians that were killed by militias in Nigeria, okay? We don't hear about that because that's Nigeria. Nobody gives a shit about Nigeria, okay? But they are human beings, and hate killing is the worst of its kind. And I don't think there is a space for haters around us, and we should fight that because I can see a lot of people here, and you all come from different backgrounds, different colors, different ethnicities, and different faiths, okay? But if you cut your skin, you will all bleed red blood, okay? And we should be above that, because after all, we're all human beings. And so I really cannot accept or comprehend these ideologies of people that advocate for certain race should prevail over others, whether they are radical Muslims or whether they are white supremacists. None of them should be acceptable, and there should be laws against that.
Yeah. I think it's time to take some questions from the audience. We've got a couple of mics on one on each side of the auditorium. If you put up your hand, I'll let the mic attendants get a microphone to you as quickly as you can, and I'll also let the attendees with the microphone tell me how much time we've got for Q&A.
Ask as hard question as you can, because otherwise it will be boring.
Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question about your situation as a refugee, but also as a doctor. Both my parents are refugees, were refugees 40 and 50 years ago, but they weren't doctors. They didn't do anything fantastic. They weren't saving people from burning buildings like that guy in France. They didn't do anything exceptional. And I feel like the story that the refugee should be an exceptional human being is a very high standard to set for someone coming basically from zero. What's your opinion on that?
Look, there are two types of people, and you can be a normal human being that live your day-to-day life and enjoy your life, and you don't become anything special, but you live comfortably. And I wish that I could do that. I'm not this type of person, and believe me, it's not all glowing, sparkling thing. It's I have a very dark side of my life where there is a big loss in my life that I regret every day because I can hardly see my kids. Okay, I don't have time to spend with my 3-year-old girl, and she's growing and she doesn't see her father. So maybe I will never forgive myself in 20 years' time when she's, young bride.
The unreasonable expectation that is set by giving these very high examples of refugees, like there's no average refugee that's okay. A refugee has to do something exceptional.
I don't see that. I mean, not necessarily, and I don't think people. The vast majority of people accept you who you are and the way you are, and you don't need to be necessarily something exceptional. And there is nothing wrong with being just an ordinary person that lives your day-to-day living and move on with your life. And if to be honest, if I was born again, I might choose family and life and children and live happily in a farm in the middle of nowhere.
Slow down.
And slow down, exactly. But
Sounds
I
like
don't think people would accept things from you. I mean, it may have this kind of perception that this is the case, but the vast majority of people don't expect much of you as a refugee. I mean, that's my understanding, but I might be wrong.
Another question on the other side of the room? We got someone down the front here.
I don't know who you can see.
Yeah, it is hard to see, isn't it?
Hi, I'm a neighbour of Jackie Bean, and I have seen your work firsthand and the difference you've made to someone's life. So, yeah, I can guarantee that it's absolutely amazing, the difference that you make. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
My question is, I read an article, and I don't know whether it's true or not. I wanted to ask you if
Do you want to put your mic a bit closer to your face?
Sorry. I wanted to ask you if you would mind giving a yes or no, but the article I read told me that the refugee camp you were in Australia, you were left alone there. You were the last person. Everyone else had left. And you were only able to get out of there because you threw a piece of paper over the wall. And someone was brave enough to pick it up and take it, and you were rescued.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things happen inside the detention centre that I still cannot explain, and I wish that one day I'll get the answers, because miraculously, I mean, look, I was a pain in the butt, and I created a lot of problems to the Department of Immigration. I had a lot of, I couldn't sit and shut my mouth, and I was very outspoken, so as a result of that, I was singled out as a troublemaker, and one of the officials smuggled a camera for me, and I took photos of everything inside the camp and published them. So I caused serious damage to the Department of Immigration. And if you remember in 2000, I don't know if you remember that, there were a massive breakout of 3 detention centers, and I was accused of organizing that. And as a result of that, I had the pleasure of spending significant time in Western Australian prisons, including maximum security jail in Broome. And I tell you what, it was absolutely fantastic. The jail system in Australia is really recommended. It was like heaven compared to hell. When I was put back, okay, miraculously, they started processing because of the breakout, and it was coming toward the Sydney Olympics, so it was a big embarrassment to the government, and they started processing people very quickly. But miraculously, my number 982 dropped off the list, and everybody was processed, and 981 was processed, 983 was processed, 1,252 was processed, and I was the only person that was left out. And it's true that a person had the number, contacted my mum after they were processed, because once you get processed, you get access to a phone. And my mum had to hire a solicitor in Sydney who would put an application for me. So I wasn't given the access to a legal representation. And I didn't have any way of getting an access to legal representation.
The other thing you talk about is being referred to as a number, that you don't have a name, the dehumanising.
Well, the minute I entered the detention centre, I was marked with a permanent marker on my shoulder with the number 982, and that was my name for the rest of time in detention centre. So that's why when I say jail was really good, because I was treated with dignity, I was treated like a human being, while in the detention centre I was like an animal.
Grab another question. Maybe one more?
There's a person there at the back.
It's your event, Jane. You need to tell me how many. One more, okay. We have started late, so it's kind of hard to know when to wrap it.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for that talk. From what you were sort of illustrating about your experience and things like that, one thing that I have picked up is a lot of resilience, particularly in the face of quite confronting and a traumatic background story. Many refugees and people who seek asylum here also experience highly traumatic experiences like that. What is, I guess, or how important is it for you to revisit that, sit with that, and use that to sort of move on, and as motivation to, I guess, spark discussions like this, but also to inspire, I guess, other refugees to talk about their stories and things like that?
Look, I dedicate significant amount of my time for these kind of events and activities that involve human rights, refugees, helping people who are under duress and in difficult circumstances. I was one of the lucky ones that I was built up to be strong, and I always believe that what doesn't break you make you stronger. But a lot of people became damaged goods as a result of the detention centre and as a result of the trouble that they went through. And it is unfortunate because these people eventually have been released to the society, and they became, a burden on the society because of the damage that we caused them. So it is very important that we all help each other with lifting the spirit and helping people, not just refugees, but help each other, regardless whether they are refugees or whether they are new migrants or whether they are Australians with disabilities or people who need help. And I think it's very important that each one of us would have a shoulder to cry on at time that we need, because life is it doesn't stay in one level and the same line. There are troughs and peaks.
Yeah,
correct.
Indeed.
and they change. And when you are down, you need someone's shoulder to cry on, and when you are up, you need someone to cheer you and clap for you and encourage you to keep going. So that's all about life.
Indeed. Been great talking to you. Please put
Thank
your hands
you.
together for Muderis. Munjed Al Muderis.
Thank you, Munjed, and thank you, Paul. Quick plug for upcoming events. Bruce Pascoe, author of Black Emu, is back here on the 24th of May, and Andrew Greer, author of Less, the 2018 Pulitzer Prize winning author, on the 7th of May, plus lots more as part of the Sydney Writers' Festival, and tickets are on sale now. Munjed obviously loves to talk, so he'll be here talking some more outside. So please stick around and grab a signed copy of the book. Put your hands together once again for Munjed and Paul.